It is also my honor to introduce Jo Marchant. Jo is, I think, a fellow traveler in the dark sky movement from the conversations I have had with her. She is the author of a wonderful book called The Human Cosmos that Tom Reinhardt actually recommended to me. Jo is an award-winning science journalist based in London. She is a PhD in genetics and medical microbiology and an MSc in science communication. And that really comes through if you read the words in her book. It is a really fantastic read. I recommend it highly. It's available in lots of different languages. And in a small kind of cosmic world circle, I reached out earlier this year to, when I was reading this book, to one of my friends from college, an individual called Dr. Pete Williams. And I reached out to him because there's a section in the book about decoding, I think it's Akkadian scrolls around the sky law of this. And Pete shared with me he'd actually been talking with Jo because during the corona pandemic and the lockdown, he had actually decoded one of the first known sky charts from some of those ancient scrolls. So in a small world and a kind of story of cosmic connection, one of my friends growing up from university days was working with Jo on one of her upcoming stories. So Jo, I'm really grateful that when we reached out to you and asked you to keynote our conference, you enthusiastically said yes. I'm really looking forward to your thoughts. I know you will trigger and inspire a lot of conversation over the next 24 hours. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruskin, for that lovely introduction and that fantastic presentation. I'm so excited to be here with all of you around the world as we kick off this amazing 24-hour event together. I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah, so today I want to talk to you about something that is so powerful that just looking at it, just seeing it changes who we are. It changes how we think, it changes how we feel. We become more creative, more curious, less stressed even weeks later. We become more joyful. We even feel as if we have more time, because that is exactly what psychologists have found for the stars. The starry sky is one of the most powerful sources we have of the emotion of awe. That's the feeling we get when we're confronted by vastness, when something's so huge that it dwarfs us, or is that wow feeling when you come up against something that's just beyond your capacity to comprehend it. And studies show that feeling awe improves our well-being in the ways that I've just mentioned, but it also changes our perspective, our outlook on life in some really interesting ways. In particular, people become more generous and outwardly focused. So after feeling awe, people feel more connected with others. They're more likely to help a stranger. They care less about money and more about the planet. It seems that just experiencing the vastness of our universe for ourselves shifts our focus away from small, selfish daily concerns and connects us to a bigger picture. But of course, we're fast losing this ability to connect with our cosmos, our sky. Every society through history, all around the planet, has been inspired by the heavens, the constellations circling the celestial poles, the dance of the sun and moon, the wandering planets, the glittering river of the Milky Way. Until now with artificial light pollution, as we've been hearing, instead of thousands of stars in the sky in today's cities, we can see just a few dozen. A third of humanity can no longer see the Milky Way, our galaxy, at all. And again, as we've been hearing, this situation is getting worse. Light pollution is increasing by 10% every year, while communication satellites are being launched by the thousand and are set to become one of the most prominent features of the night sky. So if these trends continue, our view of the stars will be gone. So that's a dramatic loss. We feel it, but so many people are already so disconnected from the sky that I think sometimes it can be hard to articulate precisely why this matters, not just for astronomers studying the stars, but for all of us in our everyday lives. There's so much to worry about down here on Earth, so many causes to fight for. Why should we spend time fighting for our view of the stars? How do we convince others that dark skies are important? So as we kick off this event, before we start talking about some of the details of preserving and promoting dark skies, I want to zoom out and think about some of these bigger questions, to look over the centuries, even millennia, at our enduring human connection with the sky. So what have the sun, moon, planets, and stars meant to people through history? How are they still important now? What do we lose when we lose our view of the stars? And in my work as a writer, I've explored different ways in which the stars have inspired humanity through history, from religion and politics to timekeeping, navigation, and art. I've found that the stars have always been intimately connected with how we live on Earth. They still shape our lives today much more than many of us realize. But I've also become fascinated by how, over time, particularly with the rise of science and technology, we have in many ways separated ourselves from our sky, our cosmos. And I think that understanding that gives us a valuable perspective on our broken relationship with nature more generally. So today I'd like to give you a brief history of our universe, not starting with the Big Bang and following the evolution of galaxies and solar systems, but a more human story following our changing connections with the cosmos, from cave paintings and stone circles through the invention of powerful telescopes and our ability to travel into space for ourselves. It's a huge topic, but I'm going to pick out just a few episodes and themes that I think help to illustrate how we've ended up where we are, before coming back to why I think the stars are still important today, and to this idea of awe. So let's start at the beginning. How did our earliest ancestors see the sky? Let's go right back to the Paleolithic era and to Lascaux Cave in France. This cave is famous for its beautiful animal paintings. There are horses, stags, oryx bulls covering the walls and ceiling. These paintings are around 20,000 years old. So this is a glimpse into the minds of some of our very earliest ancestors. This painting in particular is very interesting. It's called Bull number 18. It's the largest oryx bull in the cave, and it's got this distinctive pattern of dots above its shoulder. There's a line of 4 and a line of 2. And that same pattern keeps popping up in art through history around the planet. The Lascaux dots are on the bottom left there, but you also see it in Native American art, in Siberian shamans' art. There's even an adapted version in the logo of the modern Japanese car manufacturer Subaru. All these other motifs represent a star cluster, the Pleiades, which you can see on the top left. And what's even more intriguing is that the position of those dots at the shoulder of the bull and Lascaux Cave perfectly mirrors the position of the Pleiades in our modern star constellation Taurus. And that's not the only similarity. You can see the forwards facing horns with stars at their tips. There's the prominent eye, that's the star Aldebaran. There are speckles on the face, that's another star cluster, the Hyades, and then the Pleiades at the shoulder. So these striking similarities have led to the suggestion that maybe the artists of Lascaux weren't just painting animals, they were actually painting maps of the stars. And when I first heard about this, I was fascinated. I wanted to know, could that really be true? Could the link between the Pleiades and a bull really have survived from the Paleolithic until now? It's just so long, it just seems impossible. And why would the artists of Lascaux have been interested in the stars anyway? So it's actually very difficult to know for sure what the people of the Paleolithic were thinking. The people in Lascaux, they didn't write write that down, unfortunately, but there are different ways in which we can get closer to what they might have been thinking. One of those is to look at the lives and beliefs of traditional hunter-gatherer communities who've lived more recently, who anthropologists think may have lived similar lifestyles to the people of the Paleolithic. And what we see over and over again is the workings of the cosmos, what was happening in the sky, was absolutely central to the lives and beliefs of these kinds of communities. You see it in their rituals, their stories, their art, even the structure of their homes. And that's because what happens in the sky really does determine and reflect what happens on Earth. Before we were shielded by technology, people had to pay attention to celestial patterns because they were crucial for survival. So the sun is a fairly obvious example of that. The sun determines whether it's light or dark on Earth, whether it's hot or cold, whether life thrives or lies dormant. The Chumash people who lived until recently in California, shown here, they had a lot of stories and rituals around the sun. For example, in the darkness of the winter solstice, on the shortest day of the year, they used to plant special sticks tipped with quartz into the ground to persuade the sun to return, to draw it back on its path towards the spring. They also had a lot of cave paintings featuring celestial motifs, and they too told stories about animals in the stars. For example, about the sky coyote, that's our star Polaris, which they believed used to gamble with the sun over the fate of the people below. The moon was important too. Its monthly cycle determines light levels at night, which isn't always so important for us now, but in the past was crucial for activities from hunting to sleep. The moon cycles regulate fertility as well in many species, possibly including humans. And then there are the stars. So astrology is often dismissed today, but the stars did once convey crucial information relating to life on Earth. First, they tell us where we are. So as the Earth rotates, the stars appear to circle in the sky around the north or south celestial pole, depending on which part of the planet you're in. And the location of that pole in your sky tells you which way you're facing. Its height in the sky tells you how far north or south you are. The circling of the constellations as they rise and set on the horizon also tracks the passing of time, the passing of hours through the night. And the stars mark the seasons. As Earth moves around the sun during the year, different stars become visible in the sky. So different seasonal changes, rutting deer, ripening fruit, the arrival of rains or snow. All these changes are mirrored by changes in the stars that are visible in the sky. So for this reason, stars feature in lots of traditional calendars, particularly the Pleiades, which is a very distinctive star cluster. For the Maoris, the rising of the Pleiades signals the beginning of a new year. In Northern Africa, it used to signal the coming rainy season. And relevant for our interest in bull number 18, Native American communities such as the Blackfoot used to link the visibility of the Pleiades in the sky with the life cycle of the bison, which they hunted. So when the Pleiades set, for example, it was time to hunt. So that's led to the suggestion of, well, maybe the people of Lascaux had similar star calendars for the animals that they hunted. Certainly, seasonal changes do seem to have been important. Studies show that the different animals shown, the horses, the stags, the bulls, they were all painted at different times of year during the mating seasons of those animals. An astronomer has also calculated that when bull number 18 was painted, the visibility of the Pleiades in the sky would have nicely marked the mating season of the Oryx bull. So maybe the hunters made a similar connection and came to associate the Pleiades with a giant bull in the sky. But if that's true, could that link really have survived from then until now? It's such a long time. And we don't know the origins of the constellation Taurus. It is one of the oldest constellations that we know. It dates back at least 7,000 years to the Mesopotamians. We don't know where they got it from before that. But there are other stories told about the sky that do seem to have survived from the Paleolithic until now. For example, there's a myth called the Cosmic Hunt, which is told in different versions all around the planet. The details vary, but the basic story is that an animal is chased by hunters and escapes into the sky and becomes a star constellation. Recently, researchers compared all of the different versions of this story from around the world and made a kind of family tree, and they concluded that the story probably originated in Eurasia in Paleolithic times and then spread as humans migrated around the planet. So this is evidence that in Paleolithic times, people were telling stories about animals in the stars, and that some of those stories have survived until now. So putting all of those lines of evidence together, I think we can make a good case that these paintings were as much about cosmology as biology, representing seasonal changes on Earth and in the sky. Certainly, we can say that the people of Lascaux would have had a constant experience of the sky as conveying vital information about time, place, climate, nature, the eternal cycle of life and death. So this would have been a unified, holistic cosmos where people would have lived immersed in the sky, and they would have had a constant experience of the seasons, the stars, the natural world, all changing together through the year as one interconnected system. So when did we start to break apart that holistic cosmos, to split apart the earth and sky, to separate ourselves from nature? Well, let's jump forward now to a site in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. This is a series of stone circular enclosures that were built around the 10th millennium BC. So this is at the transition between the Paleolithic and the Neolithic era, which followed. So we're thousands of years after Lascaux Cave now, but still 6,000 years or so before Stonehenge, say, or the Egyptian pyramids at Giza. Archaeologists think that this site represented a model of the cosmos. It was a portal to other realms. Now, the Neolithic is characterized by two main features. One of those is the invention of farming. This is the so-called Neolithic revolution, when people started to control and exploit the species, the environment around them. And the other one is this, building giant monuments in stone. And it was long thought that the invention of farming, presumably driven by environmental factors, enabled people to live in more settled communities with a more predictable food supply, which enabled the organized labor necessary to build sites like this. So farming came first, and then building in stone. But Göbekli Tepe turned all that upside down, because when this was discovered, this site occurs just before the invention of farming, in fact, just a few decades before, and at exactly the place where farming was about to arise. So clearly something very interesting happened here. And if we take a closer look, this is one of the circular enclosures. You can see it's got a bench around the edge. There are these two giant pillars in the middle. They're more than 5 meters tall, and they were carved to represent human-like figures. They had belts, arms, loincloths, necklaces. There was some celestial symbolism. One of the pillars has this disc and crescent, for example, thought to represent the moon. And there was an obsession with death. Archaeologists have found hundreds of human skulls here that they think were hung up inside these stone circles. So the enclosures originally were dug down into the ground. They were probably covered over originally, and they didn't have doors. To get inside, you had to climb down and crawl through a little porthole surrounded by eerie carvings of dead animals. So archaeologists think that these circular enclosures represented the underworld. You would crawl through the porthole into this dark, sacred space filled with these occupied by these transcendent beings, the cosmic realm of the dead. So this represents a dramatic shift in people's relationship with their environment, their cosmos, compared to the Paleolithic. So in caves like Lascaux, you have mainly animal paintings. There are very few images of humans. Now there are some carvings of animals, but it's the human figures that really dominate, as if people are seeing themselves as separate from, even raised above nature. There's a move from seeing animals in the stars to spirit worlds filled with human ancestors. And people are starting to take control of their environment, their cosmos. They're building portals to other realms. Later in the Neolithic, we see other stone monuments with celestial significance. For example, Newgrange tomb, built in Ireland around 3200 BC. It was perfectly aligned so that the winter solstice sunrise sent a beam of light right into its heart. A few centuries later, we've got Stonehenge, also oriented to the solstices. And these monuments too have been described as bridges to other worlds, intended to link the realms of the living and the dead. The Egyptian pyramids at Giza, built around the same time as Stonehenge, they were oriented differently towards the celestial pole where the stars never set, but the intent was similar, to help the buried pharaoh to journey to an eternal existence in the sky. So there does, in the Neolithic, seem to have been this big and lasting change in cosmology, with people seeing themselves as dominant over nature and starting to control and exploit their environment, building portals to other realms. And linking that back to the crucial invention of farming, Göbekli Tepe, where it all started, tells us that it was that change in mindset, in cosmology, that came first, that idea of dominance over nature, dominance in the cosmos, that may have been what then made farming possible, what made it conceivable, and then therefore set the stage for all of the exploitation of nature and technological progress that was to follow. So far, we've been gleaning clues from paintings and monuments about what people might have thought about the sky. So let's jump forwards now to the first written records of beliefs about the cosmos, and the birth of an idea that's been very influential in human history, which is that our fate is written in the stars. So the Mesopotamian invention of writing gives us our earliest written insight into the mindset of an ancient civilization. We have whole libraries of clay tablets like this, dating back to the 2nd and 3rd millennia BC, detailing every aspect of life, from poetry to taxes. But what jumps out more than anything, you see it everywhere, is an absolute obsession with what was going on in the sky. The Mesopotamians still saw earth and sky as completely entwined, and with events in the sky as controlling and guiding what was happening on Earth. And that was common in ancient civilizations. The Egyptians, for example, saw the rising of the star Sirius as causing the annual flooding of the River Nile. But the Mesopotamians really took this to extremes. They saw everything that happened in the sky, from a planet changing in direction to the appearance of a sunrise, as celestial warnings from the gods about terrible things that were about to happen on Earth, war or famine. And they collected omens of books of thousands of these prophecies about what different events in the sky meant for what was about to happen on Earth. A lunar eclipse, for example, was often seen as foretelling the death of a king. And through having these omens, paying attention to what was happening in the sky, people could conduct magical rituals to dispel the evil and stop the terrible thing from happening. For example, if it was foretold that the king was about to die, was going to die, then the king could temporarily step down from the throne, put someone else there in his place, maybe a beggar or a criminal, then execute them. And then the omen would have come true and the king could safely return to his throne. So rulers had strong practical reasons for paying attention to the sky, and they often had official teams of astronomers to watch the skies for them. And the best at doing this really were the Babylonians. The priest astronomers of ancient Babylon used to watch the skies night after night, literally for centuries, and carefully they noted down what happened in astronomical diaries. So this is a picture of what the city of Babylon may have looked like around the 6th century BC, based on archaeological excavations. And you can see in the distance there's that tower that was built as the gateway between heaven and earth. This is where the astronomers conducted their nightly observations. And because they kept such detailed records, literally over centuries, over time they started to make sense of what was happening in the sky. They noticed periods of time that they called great cycles, after which different kinds of events would repeat. So the wandering path of the planet Venus, for example, repeats roughly every 8 years. Patterns of eclipses repeat every 18 years. And then around 400 BC, the priests came up with an invention that made them even more powerful, and that was the 12 signs of the zodiac. So as the Earth moves around the sun through the year, the sun appears to trace a circle in the sky against the background stars. This is called the ecliptic. And the Babylonians took that 360-degree circle, they divided it into 12 30-degree segments, named each one after a nearby star constellation, and that is the origins of the zodiac. But the reason they did this, I think, is interesting, because they did it because they wanted to have an accurate coordinate system, like a measuring scale in the sky, so that if an event happens, say a planet changed direction, they could note down much more precisely to the degree where that event happened. And that increase in accuracy enabled them to come up with complex mathematical rules to compute the movements of celestial bodies in the sky over time, even predict those movements in advance. So now they really could foretell the future. And I think that this was a really key moment in human history, because the Babylonians became the first to use numbers, mathematics, to track the sky. They moved from just experiencing the sky, the stars, to measuring and modeling it. So we started with this holistic cosmos, earth and sky, humans and nature all entwined. We talked about that first step away from nature that heralded the birth of agriculture, and the first use of numbers, mathematics, to make sense of the sky. And that in turn led to other big changes, for example, in our sense of time. So as I've touched on for most of human history, time was completely bound up with the cosmos, with the movements of the sun, moon, planets, and stars that we see in the sky, driving the days, months, seasons, years. A really nice example of that is this. It's a device called the Antikythera mechanism. It's from ancient Greece. It was found in a shipwreck more than a century ago. And it was essentially a model of the cosmos. I talked about Göbekli Tepe as a model of the cosmos, or this is an ancient Greek version. You might recognize it if you've seen the latest Indiana Jones movie as the Dial of Destiny. That movie was inspired by the Antikythera mechanism. And it's essentially a collection of interlocking bronze gear wheels, like a clockwork mechanism held in this wooden case. And it shows that the ancient Greeks built on the Babylonians' mathematical rules to build physical models of the universe, but it also shows how that those models were completely bound up with the passing of time. So this model, it looks like a clock, it's got a dial on the front, but rather than showing hours and minutes, it's showing you the sun, moon, and planets moving in the sky. So you could turn that handle on the side to move forwards and backwards in time, and it would show you what the sky would look like for any particular moment. When the Roman Empire collapsed, this technology was lost in the West. But this idea of tracking time by using gear wheels to model celestial motions did survive in the East. In the Byzantine Empire, in the Islamic world, we have sundials and astrolabes that contained little geared calendars that worked by using gear wheels to model the motions of the sun and the moon in the sky. Elsewhere as well, time and the cosmos were bound together. On the left, this is an illustration of a Chinese clock tower. It's a water clock. And as the water wheel turned, it turned this armillary sphere at the top, this model of the earth and sky that turned with the clock. On the right, this is a chariot wheel from a temple in India dating from the 13th century. So that the whole temple represented the chariot of the sun god, and it had 12 pairs of wheels to represent the 12 months of the year. The spokes of each wheel represented the hours in the day, with 3 hours in between each of those main spokes. So in societies around the world, time and the universe, the sky, were all seen as flowing together. But then in medieval Europe, something happened which would forever change the way that we see time. So in the 13th century, those geared models of the cosmos that I mentioned, they made it from the Islamic world back to Europe, where they helped to inspire the invention of mechanical clocks that run themselves. And these clocks were much more accurate than any previous clocks, than water clocks, for example, and they spread really fast throughout Europe. They were an important historical force. They regulated work and workers more accurately than ever before. So they drove economic development, but they also drove a really important philosophical shift, because to start with, these clocks were big astronomical clocks like this one. They were essentially little miniature cosmoses. They're still showing time as completely bound up with the movements of the sky, showing the sun, moon, planets, the timing of eclipses. But as clocks became more accurate, more regular, people started to see them as more accurate than the cosmos, more accurate than the sun. So they dropped those astronomical displays. And so clocks started to tell time in their own right. They're not modeling the cosmos, the sky anymore. They're just telling the time for themselves. And now we don't see time particularly as coming from the sky. We see it more as an abstract numerical quantity, something more like money, something that we buy, waste, spend, count, save, and time is no longer held in the sky. It's held in our machines. I just wanted to mention quickly that what's happened to our sense of time has also happened to our sense of place. So through most of history, people have navigated using the stars. Polynesian navigators are a really nice example of this. So they used to take bearings by watching sequences of stars rising on the horizon through the night, and they remembered these sequences using religious stories and chants. They also paid close attention to wildlife, water currents, wind patterns. So they were really immersed in earth and sky, and through doing that, they were able to navigate successfully over hundreds of miles of open ocean. But in the West, of course, navigators took a very different path, increasingly relying on mathematical instruments and charts, until we no longer need to look up at the sky to know where we are. We no longer need to even look out of the car window, and our satellites have replaced the stars. I want to talk about power next, because beliefs about how the cosmos works have always determined who gets to be in charge on Earth and why. Ancient rulers often modeled themselves on all-powerful divine celestial beings. Roman emperors often presented themselves as Jupiter. We've got the ancient Chinese Emperor Wu as the son of heaven, the Egyptian Pharaoh Akhenaten as son of the sun, more recently the French King Louis XIV as the Sun King. So they're taking their power, their status from the divine heavens, and that works really well. It's really hard to question someone's authority if it's coming from, well, that's just how the universe works. But I wanted to give an example of how beliefs about the cosmos have shaped political systems more recently as well, in today's democracies. And this goes back to Isaac Newton in the 17th century. He revolutionized physics and our ideas about the universe when he showed that everything in the universe, from particles to planets, can be described according to the same mathematical laws. And this means that celestial bodies are no longer divine or powerful beings that can do what they want, move where they want. They have to obey the same physical laws as everything else. And what's interesting is how the implications of that seeped out into society, because people started to ask, well, if that's true for the universe, shouldn't that be true for society as well? Shouldn't everyone, from commoners to kings, have to obey the same natural laws? And these ideas became very influential into the Enlightenment during the 18th century, during emerging debates about democracy and human rights. In Europe, for example, politicians and philosophers were talking about the evolving relationship between monarchs and their governments. Montesquieu here is arguing that a government should have a balance of powers. He's talking about the same balance of forces between the centrifugal and centripetal force that Newton described as holding planets stable in their orbits. People like Montesquieu wanted to replicate that in society. They thought that a government should have the right balance of forces to hold citizens in stable orbits. And these ideas reached America as well. An influential figure there calling for revolution, independence from England was Thomas Paine. So at the time, America was often seen as a planet orbiting the central sun of England. But Paine argued that in nature, satellites are always smaller than the planet or the sun that they orbit, whereas America is larger than England. So he's using an argument, an astronomical argument about the size relationship between a planet and its sun to argue that the larger territory of America should break free. After independence, the founders of the new United States were debating how they should set up their new democratic system. They argued about how tightly controlled the states should be by federal government, whether they should be left to move freely in their proper orbits, or whether their attractions and repulsions should be controlled. But despite their differences, they're all now working in this new Newtonian framework. Just like their universe, they wanted their government to follow logic and physical laws. And this comes through as well in how the new nation chose to present itself. I mentioned that America had been seen as this planet orbiting the central sun of England, but once after independence, they needed a new image. They couldn't just be a lone planet drifting on its own. So they came up with the idea of a constellation of equal stars in the sky. I want to squeeze in a quick story about light, because much of our information about the wider universe comes from the light that reaches us here on Earth. For most of history, it's been pretty much our only source of information about the wider universe. And in the 19th century, astronomers dramatically changed what we can do with that light. So this is a story about William and Mary Huggins. They were husband and wife astronomers in Victorian England, and they were among the first people to realize how much information starlight really holds. So chemists at the time knew that if you burn different substances, they burn with different color flames. And you can use a prism to split that colored light into a rainbow or spectrum. And you get different lines in that spectrum, which act like fingerprints. They realize that every chemical element has its own distinctive fingerprints of lines in that spectrum that you can use to identify which elements are present in a burning substance. And what the Hugginses did was apply that to the sky, to the light that was coming from distant stars. So they had this huge telescope in their garden in South London, just around the corner from where I am right now. But they didn't look through it. They used a prism to separate the light from stars into a spectrum, and then they compared the lines that they got with the lines in the spectrum from elements that they burned down on Earth, things like carbon, nitrogen, iron. And they showed that the stars are made from just the same building blocks of matter as things on Earth. The same chemistry extends across the universe. And that might seem fairly obvious now, but at the time, this was something that scientists had thought was impossible ever to know. Stars are so distant, we can't ever get a physical sample of them. So they figured we can study their appearance, how they move, but not their composition. And yet here, hidden in the starlight, was a way to work out what they're made of, how they work. And this was the origins of the field of astrophysics. Now we have hugely powerful telescopes based on the same principle that look not just at visible light, but across the entire electromagnetic spectrum from ultraviolet to infrared. They've opened up a whole new understanding of the universe and really shaken human culture. Now our traditional star myths have been replaced by scientific, evidence-based stories. For example, spectroscopy has shown that nearly every atom in our bodies was once part of a star. Astrophysicists have used star spectra to pin down the life cycles of stars, and that's enabled them to identify completely new kinds of celestial objects, such as supernovae, neutron stars, black holes. It was a redshift in the spectra from distant stars that first told astronomers that galaxies are flying away from us in every direction. The universe is expanding, and that led to the theory of the Big Bang. Now we have a scientific creation story for the universe. So we understand more about the universe than ever before, with knowledge that stretches far beyond what's visible to us in the sky. But I think there's an irony there, because nobody actually looks through these telescopes. The photons are picked up by electronic detectors and analyzed by computer. Our knowledge of the stars now comes from our instruments and our calculations. There's no need for us to look up at the sky at all. And as I've touched on through the talk, the same thing is happening, or has happened, in our everyday lives. Technology is increasingly replacing any need for a direct human connection with the stars. We have artificial light and heating, so we don't need to pay attention to cosmic cycles in how we live. Our offices, shopping centres, floodlit sports grounds give us access to a daytime lifestyle whenever we want. We have comfortable temperatures and constant food supply all year round. We have clocks and GPS to tell us when and where we are. Even when it comes to social life and entertainment, we're not going to be sitting around a nighttime fire under a starry sky. We're more likely to be looking at our screens. And this technology gives us unprecedented freedom and convenience in how we live, but we're increasingly realizing that this separation from our wider surroundings does have significant downsides. Neuroscientists, for example, have looked at the effects of regularly using satellite navigation systems, and they're finding that it changes our brains. It erodes our awareness of our wider environment and our ability to find our way for ourselves. It also turns out that the more precisely we measure and worry about time with ever more accurate clocks, the less of it we feel that we have. We're always rushing to deadlines and appointments. And this is leading to a phenomenon in psychology called time famine, where people feel constantly rushed and stressed as if they never have enough time. And that impacts in turn on mental and physical health. Our separation from the cosmos also affects our physiology more directly as well. Biologists are increasingly realizing the extent to which our bodies depend on the regular cycles of the sun and the moon to regulate pretty much every aspect of biology, from sleep and mood to digestion, kidney function, even cell division. So separating ourselves from those cosmic cycles is having impacts on health, from insomnia, depression, and obesity to heart disease and cancer. Even wildlife, as we've heard, is suffering from being separated from the cosmos. Artificial light pollution now covers more than a fifth of the Earth's land area, and that is disrupting bird and turtle migration, bat feeding, amphibian breeding, plankton migration, plant growth. It's killing insects by the trillion. The problem is so bad that a few years ago, some researchers suggested that light pollution should be seen as a global threat on a par with climate change. So we have this wonderful scientific understanding of the universe now, but looking back over this long history, what really jumps out to me is how, as we've increasingly relied on measurements, instruments, calculations, our technology to understand and control our universe, we have increasingly sidelined our own experience, our own personal connection with the sky. Even when that separation damages our health, damages our environment, much of humanity no longer sees our view of the stars as useful or important. So I wanted to finish by coming back to one more reason why I think the stars are still important now, and that's this emotion of awe. What happens to us when we see the stars? The astronaut Chris Hadfield described his first spacewalk like this. He was in the space station, put on his spacesuit. He'd had years of training. He was completely technically prepared for his mission. And then he stepped out into space, and he was attacked by raw beauty, as he put it. It was stupefying, he said. It stops your thought. He said in one direction he could see the velvet bucket of stars stretching on forever, and in the other direction there was the Earth, this amazing kaleidoscope of color pouring by as the planet turned beneath him. And he said it made him realize the power of the presence of the world as told to me by my ability to see it. And I think that's lovely, on the importance of us experiencing our world, our cosmos, of it being not just machines up there, but people able to see it. And this is something that other astronauts feel as well. These hard-headed, technically trained people come back from space wanting to talk above all about the beauty of our planet, the need to protect it, the need to treat each other better. And we get the same experiences and insights when we look up at the stars from Earth as well. When we get a chance to see them, a truly dark sky is something that I've only experienced a couple of times in my life, and it's mind-blowing. And this has a name too, celestial vaulting, when we feel lifted up into the stars and at one with the cosmos. And as I mentioned at the beginning, psychologists have found that these experiences of awe are really important. They make us more creative, more curious, happier. We treat each other better. We care less about money and more about the planet. It seems that just experiencing the universe that we live in for ourselves puts our lives into perspective in a really important way. It shifts our attention away from our small daily concerns that maybe seem so all-consuming, and we see a bigger picture. We feel part of society, part of the world, part of the universe, and that changes us. It changes how we live. It changes the decisions that we make. Researchers have warned about something that they call awe deprivation in modern society, where our increasing focus on small screens separates us from each other, from the planet, from the bigger picture. We become more selfish and narcissistic. And I think that that's telling us that the stars matter now more than ever. As a species, we're facing so many global challenges, and I think we need science and technology to help us understand those problems, to come up with solutions, but to turn that into action, to actually make the changes that we need to make to live peacefully and sustainably on this planet. I think we're going to need some connection, and we're going to need some awe. So going forwards into the future, I think that the challenge is to rediscover something of that holistic cosmos that I talked about at the beginning, those connections between earth and sky, because it is all connected. When we talk about the importance of our relationship with nature, of protecting our environment alongside forests and oceans, I think we need to include the stars in that, and not as something distant up there many light years away, but as a crucial part of our surroundings, our experience, our well-being, our choices right here. And I think that's why the work of Dark Sky International and everybody here is so important, whether it's wildlife protection, lighting design, dark sky policy, photographing and sharing the wonders of the night sky. And I'm really looking forward to all of the talks and debates over the next 24 hours. Dark skies are important for astronomers, but I hope we can all get the message across that they're much more than that. They're an essential part of our human identity, our cultural heritage. They connect us to people all through history and all around the planet. They're important for our biology, our mental and physical well-being, for the species that we share this planet with. And I think they still have the power to inspire and guide us today. So thank you so much for listening. Here are just the books that I've written. They're available in many languages. There's more details about those on my website, jomarchant.com, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and continuing the debate with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jo. That was really such a beautiful and incredibly thoughtful presentation. I personally really resonate with the idea that the connection that we're missing isn't just between humans and the stars, but it encompasses this entire natural world that exists between us, you know, the seasons and the animals. And I think because so many of our calendars and clocks were initially calibrated by that, you know, the celestial world, but we're so abstracted from it now that we don't even recognize the connection.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem, this forgetting of what we even had that makes it harder to explain why this loss is so important. Absolutely.
Yeah. We have a few questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to quickly slide in one of my own. In your opinion, do you think that there is a way to maintain our technological progress as humans while also reestablishing this connection to nature? Because when I listened to your presentation, it sounded like the barrier to this connection was this abstraction that came with technology and technological development.
Yeah, no, I absolutely do think that that's possible. And I tried to get across that. I mean, I love science, and I have a scientific background. I think that what science and technology give us is incredible. So it's absolutely not about trying to go backwards and lose all of that. I think for me that what the problem has been is that as we've had this increasing abstraction, we've moved towards a sort of more scientific technological way of thinking. We've just forgotten about that personal experiential connection. So it's about finding a way of bringing those two things together that I think is important. And I think some of what Ruskin was talking about at the beginning about intelligent lighting design, that it's actually a win-win situation. We don't need to get rid of all of the lights. We just need to be more aware and more intelligent in how we design the lights that we have. And I think it's that similar principle of just thinking about the bigger picture when we move forward with science and technology. So when we've got that progress, it's not just purely about profit or about convenience or big business or whatever it is, that we're actually thinking about that bigger picture in terms of human well-being, but also planetary well-being as well.
You answered that really well. Thank you. Andy asked, apart from the fact that agriculture developed near Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, is there other evidence that this culture shifted their worldview to dominance over nature? Indigenous cultures seem to have in common that they're origin stories that stress living in harmony with nature. It seems significant that Christianity introduced the idea of domination in Genesis. It's quoted, subdue it, have dominion over the other creatures that we share the planet with. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, so I mean, this is only one step on a very long in a very long process. So my latest book, The Human Cosmos, kind of tells this story, and I have a whole chapter about religion and looks at the origins of Christianity, because I agree that that was a really important shift in this idea of and with monotheism in general, actually, of having a creator outside of the universe. So the universe becomes the product with this sort of creator outside, rather than sort of divine beings within the universe as a kind of living being rather than a dead product. That's something that you see with monotheism, and absolutely Christianity in particular has this idea of dominion, of us being sort of stewards of the environment and perhaps able to exploit the environment rather than being part of it. But I also think that what happened at Göbekli Tepe was important. So there's sort of different stages along that same journey, and absolutely hunter-gatherer communities that we see now do seem to still be much more sort of embedded within nature to have a sort of more sustainable kind of world view, if you like. So I don't think it's one or the other particularly, but I think both are really interesting developments that have sort of along the line of how we've got to where we are now.
So would you say it's been sort of a gradual cultural shift towards
yeah, I mean, anything with global history, I mean, that's a huge simplification, because so many different things have happened in different, parts of the world, and different worldviews in different places. So to sort of make it manageable, or the story that interested me was this sort of rise of science and this kind of mathematical way of looking at the world. But absolutely, Christianity has been really important in that. There's lots about this sort of Christian worldview and this sort of this creator outside and this God's eye view of looking down on the universe from outside, that's absolutely embedded in modern science and the modern scientific way of looking at the world.
Okay. Steve says, of course, it's true that we are separated from cosmic cycles by our overwhelming technology, but so many of our tools are based on those very cycles. For example, AM versus PM, or how the food we eat still comes from sources that depend on seasonality. Can you comment?
Yeah. So yeah, I think that this is really just, the truth is that we are connected, whether we like it or not. We need to grow food on the planet. Our clocks are ultimately, our time is ultimately based on the cosmos. Our biology is ultimately regulated by the sun and the moon. So it's not that it's like we're living in a way that's disconnected, but we're not actually completely disconnected. I think that's part of what the problem is, that we are rooted in the planet and the wider cosmos, and we can't get away from that because we're living beings. But we're sort of trying to ignore it, if that makes sense. So I think he's absolutely right, but that's why trying to disconnect ourselves isn't really working, isn't improving health, isn't improving mental well-being.
Okay. There's also a request for clarification for the term that you used. Was it celestial vaulting?
Yeah. Celestial vaulting. Okay. As in, vaulting over jumps.
Like a pole vault. Yeah.
Pole vault. Yeah, so it's just a name that's been given to a feeling that a lot of writers have described through history. Maybe some of the audience have experienced it, of when you're that sort of extreme transcendent awe, where you kind of lose that sense of yourself and you're looking up at the stars and you just feel lifted up and into the sky and just part of the cosmos. So these extreme experiences of awe can cause a kind of ego dissolution, kind of like a loss of self, and you just feel at one with the universe. So it's just a term that's been coined to describe that feeling, and I just really love it, so I wanted to mention it.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think it really accurately captures that feeling of like, I don't know if it's like a lifting really, but it's just this kind of dissolution into something so much bigger than yourself.
Yeah, and there's some really interesting work that psychologists and neuroscientists have done on these experiences of awe, because people, it's called the small self phenomenon. So after experiencing awe, people, they estimate their physical size is smaller, they draw themselves smaller, they sign their names smaller. You also see reduced brain activity in parts of the brain that, or sort of patterns of brain activity that have been associated with our sense of self. So it's almost as if the sense of self just shrinks, but at the same time, people feel more connected to that bigger picture. So it's just kind of more evidence for that. That's the sort of the mechanism of what's happening here, is that we kind of feel smaller and bigger at the same time, if that makes sense, because your own self is kind of, you're not paying attention to that anymore. That's shrinking. You feel smaller, but then at the same time you're connected and you're feeling part of a much bigger picture. I think it's really fascinating.
It's a beautiful contradiction, but not really, just something whole, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's just so important that we need that perspective in our lives, and that's something that people have, I guess, always got from the sky, also got from spirituality, but a lot of sources of that perspective we don't have anymore. So I guess that's what's behind this awe deprivation that researchers have been talking about, that the more we're just looking inwards, looking down, looking at small things, we just become more and more isolated, more and more selfish, and we don't see those connections.
And we're worse off for it. Emily asks, are you optimistic about a possible shift back to humans connecting to the cosmos?
I think we have to be optimistic about it. I don't think there's any other choice, really. I mean, I think it's the same with the planet, with environmental issues, our connection with nature generally. None of us know what's going to happen, but we just have to be optimistic. I think that you just have a choice of whether you're going to get up each morning and give up, or whether you're going to get up each morning and think we can do things better, we can make a change. So yeah, I think partly because even if it didn't change anything else, I think that that's just a better way to live, to be positive about what we can achieve. But actually, I think that can also, the more positive we can be, the more self-fulfilling that's hopefully going to be, and it gives people the motivation to keep working and towards those changes, and hopefully can help that to come about in the future.
Yeah, it's easier to accomplish something if you're optimistic about it than if you're resigned yourself from the get-go. So I think that's a really important perspective. Unfortunately, in the interest of time, I have to stop the questions here. I'm really sorry to those of you who couldn't get your questions answered. Maybe we can collect the questions and get them to Joe some other way.
Sure.
But once again, I want to give Joe a big thank you for such an inspiring keynote. I think all of the comments in the chat will echo my sentiments, that it was really such a great way to set the tone for the rest of this conference. Also, thank you so much to Ruskin and Tom and to the Dark Sky staff for all the work that they've put into putting this incredible event together and keeping everything functioning smoothly. And no less importantly, thank you to all of you who are attending for your participation, for your questions, your comments, your enthusiasm, and your passion for the night sky.